So we're talking about sovereignty and the balance and the purification of Swadhisthana, the difference between alone, being alone, and lonely. And that lonely, the feeling of being lonely is the ego. When somebody is physically alone, it is when the ego is still guiding the experience and is craving for validation. So the ego, even when there is nobody else around, when there is no other, because you can only get validation from the ego, for the ego, from the other. The ego has to see some sort of separateness from itself in order to validate itself. So when you're alone, when you're physically alone, but that imbalance of Manipura, that imbalance of the ego is still striving for validation, to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be prioritized, is there. I feel that is the experience of lonely. And then when that person physically comes into the presence of somebody else, you can tell, because their first interactions with somebody else is always one of, I had this dream, I saw this, I need this, I want to tell you, I want to take my presence and connect it to you, because I have not breathed the entire time that I've been away, because I have had no validation, and therefore as soon as I see you, I'm going to suck you dry. And you can speak. Right? And that's what it feels like when when people are coming from this place of not sovereign, when they're coming from this codependent place, and they haven't moved out of lonely and into the sacred sovereignty of being alone. And this, I find, I was in the beginning, before we started recording this, I was joking with Chai, is that when people have those patterns, I think that's when Swamiji makes them building in charge of an empty building for 3 months. Where your meals will be offered to you, but you will literally not see another human being for a month. Because you've got to learn how to be alone. You've got to learn how to tease that ego, which we all have. We all want validation. We all want to be seen. We all want to be acknowledged. But we have to tease that ego away from the soul. Because when somebody is physically alone, and they're physically alone, but a sovereign being alone becomes a state of deep living from the soul. This is what my feelings, what my experience of a healthy Swadhisthana is that the one's own abode, your home inside of yourself when you are alone, is a deeply joyful, deeply sovereign, deeply sacred place that then needs to be honored and needs to be protected. Not protected from the outside, but held sacred. Held sacred is a better way of putting it than protected. And so when you're able to come into this deep sovereignty, and I know there's so many people right now between frozen pipes and leaking pipes, and there's just water flowing and not flowing, and like this is what this time right now, this 3 weeks of Mercury in retrograde really is going to give us an opportunity, because Mercury is an air sign, which is Gemini, and Aquarius is an air sign, and so when that's solid, right, within itself, which means the water, the earth, and the fire is what is going to be the opportunity. We've got the air, we've got the ability to change right now, we've got the ability to set a new groove, to carve a new path within ourselves. That is what the air can do. It can blow in new winds and blow out the old very, very easily. So to harness this air, and Mercury being in retrograde is really about the ability to do this internally, to go inside and do this, because it's not about speaking out. It's about listening in, right? Because Mercury is the messenger of the gods. And so really right now with Mercury in retrograde in Aquarius, we really have this opportunity to listen deeply, not to our egos that are childish, screaming, narcissistic little monkeys, right? But to hear this deep, deep song of gratitude that our souls have to sing. And so we need to learn to be alone, so that, because then what happens is when you are in the sovereign state of being alone, and I've experienced this in Rikia a couple of years ago when I had the tremendous blessing of Param Jyoti and Narayan coming back at New Year's, or just before New Year's. Between Christmas and New Year's, they left Rikia and they came back to Canada. And they left me and Rikia until Makar Sankranti on the 14th of January. So I left on the 15th of January. And I had those 2.5, almost 3 weeks where I was not a mother in the ashram. I was not a wife in the ashram. I was literally just me in the ashram. And I hadn't experienced that since 2008. Before I got married. And it was the beginning of 2008 when I had to go through my Swadhisthana rewiring, when I went to Australia to say goodbye to one of my distractions, which is actually when I went and saw Swami Niranjan. And it doesn't sound like a long time, but it doesn't need to be physically a long time, but between that Easter in April and June 1st when I met Param Jyoti, that last half of April and all of May, basically 6 weeks, in that 6 weeks, I learned how to be alone. With 6 weeks, that's not actually a very long time. It doesn't sound like a long time at all. And yet that's really all it took. Was 6 weeks of being alone. And by the end of that 6 weeks, when I met Param Jyoti on June 1st, I was so mad. I was so mad that I had met this person that I then wanted to date and be in a relationship with. Well, let's face facts. By the second date, he had moved in and we were together. But I was so mad because I didn't want to date anybody. I was finally happy being alone. I was finally so content, so joyful in my own company. There were no distractions, no dating, nothing, just alone. And alone did not have even the smallest irritating grain of sand of being lonely. It was just alone. And then I met Param Jyoti. And then I was like, crap, why? Why are you here now when I am finally happy by myself? And of course, that's when I would meet my husband and my partner, because I went into that relationship not needing him, wanting him, but not needing him. And then that is the basis of our marriage. I want you. Life is like so much better with you here, but I actually don't need you. I don't need you to be here. I want you to be here. And that is when you come into one-on-one relationship with someone from a sovereign place. Is whatever is in your most high, may that be done. If you need to be with somebody else, be somebody. Yes, of course I'm going to be upset. Yes, I'm going to be slightly heartbroken. Okay, I'm going to be super heartbroken. But I am going to be okay because I've come into this okay. I'm going to come out of this okay. Because at the end of the day, whether we're 95 or 100, one of us is going to die. All right? Or maybe both of us are going to die together. I don't know. But it's something, this is temporary, right? And so but the sovereignty of who has come into the temporary is still going to be sovereign at the end of the temporary. And that can't be shifted. But when you come from an out of balance Swadhisthana and Manipura chakras, where codependency cycles into martyrdom, cycles into resentment, cycles back into guilt of feeling resentful and jealous, cycles back into lonely, cycles being back into wanting validation, cycles back into not getting the validation, cycles back into being resentful, cycles back into guilt of and then it just creates this reality where you can't be by yourself and people don't want to be with you because there's just that cycle, right, of going round and round. And like there's millions of people in this cycle where they can't be alone. They have never learned to be alone because they don't think they're going to like who they see. But I can tell you who they will actually find alone, not the ego, but the sovereignness. The sovereign soul is beautiful. And this is the thing, when you've found that sovereignty, when you've found how to be truly alone and you do not crave the presence of others, then when you move from being, this is not about the rejection of others, because in Rikia, segue, hi, when I was in Rikia, not being a mother and not being a wife for those 2.5 weeks, again, it doesn't have to be a long time, I had this delicious experience of being alone. And yet I was still in an ashram full of 100 people. And I had duties with other people all day. And I had to interact with other people all day. But my interactions changed. Because when you're alone, the soul, not lonely, when that you're alone and the ego can step aside because it doesn't need validation, the soul starts to live. The soul starts to ooze out of you. And the portal between Swadhisthana and Vishuddhi Chakra of the higher state and into the mundane, mogul, third dimensional world dissolves. This boundary dissolves, and you start to embody this sovereign soul connected to all while being in a third dimensional action of sweeping or cleaning or feeding or eating or pooping or whatever you're doing. But the sovereign soul perspective never changes. And of course we can do this and we can amplify it and we can sustain it by using mantra in the mind while we're around other people. But what happens is when you move from the soul sovereign aloneness into the presence of another being, you ask nothing of that other being. You become this orb of self-contained joy that is capable of interacting with somebody, but energetically does not ask anything of them. Can walk into a room and not say hello. Can walk into a space and start doing their duty without needing to have a discussion. Needing to be acknowledged, right? And so this self-contained orb starts to find its sovereign being, and it's this deep state of deliciousness. And in that deep state of deliciousness of Swadhisthana births through into a complete experience of contentment. And so this is what the opportunity is right now.
I felt I could feel that I could change quite easily. And when you mentioned the air, Aquarius and Gemini, and that things that can move quite easily. And I'm like, now that we've named it, oh.
Right.
I didn't know what it was. I didn't know where it was coming from. And now I want to know what to do when I feel that.
Okay, well, we've got, I think, don't quote me, but I think Mercury's in retrograde from the 28th until the
20th or something?
13th?
Oh, earlier.
12th? 13th?
Yep.
Right? Which means we've basically got 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Let's play. Let's make a sadhana that goes for it for the next 2 weeks until the end of Mercury in retrograde. Okay? Numonarayan YouTubers, if you would like more content like this to brighten your day and fill your cup, please hit the subscribe button on the channel and you'll get a little red dot every time we release something. Have a beautiful day.